Noddings.
Thanks very much, Eric. I'm glad to be here. In some ways, I don't like to have those long lists read off because it makes me tired before I begin the talk. Now, some of what we're going to talk about this afternoon may be a little difficult, but it is something that I think we have to talk about. And I would like to congratulate and thank Missouri State for taking this on, because it takes considerable courage today to run a conference of this sort, where opinions differ greatly, and the expression of those opinions sometimes cause high emotions. And so we want to keep that in mind as we tackle the topic this afternoon. We're living in a time of high tensions, not only in the world at large, where we have a lot of problems associated with religion, but even right here in our own country right now. On the one hand, we've got presidential candidates falling over themselves to proclaim their faith, usually Christianity. I mean, they often want to mention that specifically. Look at me, I'm a Christian sort of thing. But at the same time, for the first time in Western history, we have outspoken atheists whose books are at the top of the bestseller list. Now, there have always been atheists, but for most centuries, people didn't dare declare themselves because the penalties were pretty high for declaring yourself to be an atheist. Starting in the last half of the 19th century, we had more people who felt willing to speak out on that issue because they knew they weren't going to be executed for it. So here, this is an enormous tension. I mean, imagine, look at the bestseller list. We've had Richard Dawkins with The God Delusion, had two books by Sam Harris, one, The End of Faith, the other, Letter to a Christian Nation. We have had Christopher Hitchens in there with God Is Not Great, subtitle, How Religion Poisons Everything. I mean, these are very strong titles. And then there's Daniel Dennett with Breaking the Spell. Of the ones I've just mentioned, the strongest philosophically, of course, is Dennett's Breaking the Spell. And I'll say a little bit more about that as we go on. So here we've got these enormous tensions. And the question is, can schools do anything on this? I don't mean to solve the problem. Of course, schools can't solve the problem. I don't even know what the problem is, actually. But what obligation do we have as educators to talk about these things? It doesn't seem right just to ignore them. So you've got books on the bestseller list, but maybe talk about those. We've got candidates, like I said, falling over each other to confess their faith, and we don't want to talk about that either. It seems to me that we can't really claim to be educating if we're not willing to talk about some of these things, and to talk about them as openly as we can manage, as respectfully as we can manage, and as critically as we can manage. Now, one thing I want to say right here at the outset is that the books I've just mentioned on the new outspoken atheism, there's a tone that many of us might object to. And I don't mean just those who are professed Christians, but anyone who is sensitive to tone. The tone in all of these books, except Dennett's, is scornful and mocking. And if you want, what you want to do is to invite conversation, that's probably not the best way to do it. You probably need to find another way. So I'm saying that right at the beginning, and at the end, I'll say that I think one of the most important jobs we have as educators today is to try to find a mode of communication. How do we talk about these things? Most of us haven't even found a way to talk about them in our families. You can picture family situations where the mommy in the family says to the daddy, we're going to have a family dinner, Uncle Louie is going to be here. Don't talk about religion. We want to have a nice dinner, right? So if we can't even talk about these things in our own families, it becomes even more difficult on the level of the public scene. So what kinds of things might we do? Well, one, of course, is we might teach a course on world religions. And many schools today, I shouldn't say many, quite a few schools today do teach courses on world religion. And the hope is that at the end of the course, kids will have more respect for other religions, so that Christians will have more respect for Muslims and Jews. But I think it was Jeremy Gunn yesterday who said that sometimes the end result is that kids are even more enthusiastic about their own religion at the end of these courses. And so it isn't clear that we necessarily get a higher level of tolerance. But I think that is it's a reasonable bet that we'll get a level of tolerance out of this. However, what doesn't seem to happen, what I have never seen happen, I don't think people are even trying, is while a Christian may come out of it with higher tolerance or respect for Muslims and Jews, he or she does not come out of it with any understanding of atheism, agnosticism, deism, or secular humanism in general. Now, see, that's kind of odd. In other words, we'll respect anyone who professes a faith, but anyone who doesn't is what? A bad person? Someone to be avoided? Someone who's surely going to hell? These things have to be discussed as well. Now, along with the idea of teaching world religions and hoping for some understanding of unbelief, and that's, of course, the main topic for today, there have also been some suggestions for teaching the Bible as literature. And the Bible Literacy Project has put out an aesthetically gorgeous book. It's entitled The Bible and Its Influence. And it's a coffee table style book. Pretty expensive, too. The idea behind it is to present the Bible, stories of the Bible in particular, in a way that would be acceptable to mainstream Christians and Jews. I have the book. I looked at it. It is lovely. I think it does make sense to teach the Bible as literature. And, by the way, Richard Dawkins, great scientist and atheist, agrees on this. He says there's nothing in the atheistic worldview that says we should cut out the Bible or any sacred books from our curriculum. And then he goes on to list a couple of pages of literary allusions that a person can't really understand without some familiarity with the Bible. So there's a level of agreement there between believers and unbelievers that we should do something about Bible literacy. But now a question arises here. After looking the book over very carefully, and there are significant omissions. Now maybe that can't be helped. You can't include everything in every book that tackles a specific topic. But the things that are omitted are all the things that might raise some doubts about the nature of God. So you get all the stories from Genesis, Exodus, almost no mention, little teeny mention of Leviticus, nothing on Numbers and Deuteronomy. And if you're familiar with the Bible, that it isn't just something you carry around under your arm, but you've actually read it, you know that those two books of the Bible are horrendous books. And people reading stories from them, passages from them, might very well have second thoughts about what they were buying into. So those were omitted. Now the question for me is, if that is a sort of systematic thing, if you take out all the stories in which God appears as a not very attractive person, then it's this Bible literacy, or does it verge on promotion of religion? And I'm not sure about that, and I welcome questions on it, and I think we should talk about it. Now, here, this next thing is pretty dramatic, and I want you to keep in mind that what I'm going to read now is Richard Dawkins speaking, not me, okay? So don't go home and say, Noddings said, and quote this. This is Richard Dawkins speaking, and it fits right in with what I'm talking about here and why we can't omit some of these things. Okay, here's Dawkins. He refers to the Old Testament God as, quote, arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capricially malevolent bully. That's Noddings. Those are really strong words. I mean, you might argue for an English teacher, you'd say, well, at least we should read that paragraph because look at the vocabulary. Look at the words that kids may never have heard. And so we'll enlarge their vocabulary. But my take on it is this. Reading this, I would like kids to be able to point to the stories and passages in the Bible that Dawkins might use to support his position. Don't have to agree with him. But where would you point in the Bible to support the accusation that the Old Testament God is a bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser? Would you be able to find the passage and say, here? And here's my response to it. Where would you point if you're going to support the accusation that it was infanticidal? You should be able to find that. You can't just respond by raving that all of this is wrong, untrue, blah, blah, blah. You've got to be able to answer by saying, all right, I know where this came from, but now let me tell you the other side of the story. And so that's my objection to omitting parts of the Bible that make God look that way, see? There's no way then to answer the objection. Okay, now that's a really hard one. Put that aside for a minute. Another thing I would like kids to know is that there is a shared interest in spirituality between believers and unbelievers. Now, it's not completely shared. We had a very interesting discussion at lunchtime today on the role of spirituality in higher education. And as I listened to it, I realized that we have very widely different views on what we mean by spirituality. And most of the people who spoke were equating spirituality with religion. And that is one meaning of spirituality. You use the word in ordinary associations, most people will immediately think religion. Now, I'm not suggesting that we get a fine-tuned definition either, because sometimes we carve the guts out of a concept and we try to pin it down to one definition. So accept the fact that we've got a variety of definitions of spirituality. But the one that attracts me most, and that attracts most secular humanists, I think, is the notion that a spiritual experience is an experience characterized by a deep, strong, affective response, one that transcends the time, place, and moment. It's this feeling that there's something wonderful, something awesome, something beyond me, beyond the moment. Sometimes the past, the present, and future all blend together when you experience a spiritual moment, spiritually defined in this way. And I've written in several places about some of my own such experiences, and I use specifically the sunrise experience. I'm living on the Jersey Shore now. I can see the ocean from almost every room in the house, and I'm a sunrise addict. I just love to see the sunrise. And some mornings it's just a matter of dragging myself out of the bed, and there it is. It comes up every day. But other days, there's this spiritual feeling. Something goes along with that experience that transcends time and place. And I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. That's a spiritual experience. The same thing may happen when you hold a newborn infant. I've had that happen too. It's just such a miracle. And both my husband and I are gardeners, so sometimes early in the spring, you go out and you brush the mulch aside, and here are these tiny reddish seedlings. And the feeling comes up. Again, this spiritual feeling. Now, as I said, this is a shared experience. Here's Martin Gardner. Martin Gardner is a philosophical theist. That means he believes in God, but he doesn't believe in God as described by any religious institution. Okay? He's a philosophical theist. Some of you may know Martin Gardner from the years that he wrote the math column in Scientific American, and several books on mathematical puzzles. They're wonderful, just wonderful. One of my heroes. And he also did the annotated Alice. Are you familiar with that? He took Alice in Wonderland and did the annotated version so that you can go through Alice in Wonderland and see what all the odd words mean, what the logical puzzles are, and so forth. So here's Martin Gardner on this feeling, this spiritual feeling. He says the sense of the numinous is compounded by feelings expressed by such words as awe, terror, dread, mystery, fascination, astonishment, wonder. If one is a theist, the emotion combines with strong feelings of humility, of the littleness of oneself, of holiness, of gratitude for the privilege of existing. But then Gardner goes on to say that he believes that the degree to which a person feels such emotions is roughly proportional to the strength of that person's faith in God. Now here I think he's wrong. I think, he's just wrong on that. Here's Sam Harris, a confessed atheist whose scornful words I'm not all that crazy about. But here's what he writes on this. Man is manifestly not the measure of all things. The universe is shot through with mystery. The very fact of its being and our own is a mystery absolute, and the only miracle worthy of the name. No myths need be embraced for us to commune with the profundity of our circumstance. No personal God need be worshipped for us to live in awe at the beauty and immensity of creation. That's Sam Harris, confessed atheist. Here's Daniel Dennett, also a confessed atheist. Because you don't have to be a believer to be entranced by Buddhist, Hindu, and Shinto temples of surreal intricacy and sublime proportion. Bach's St. Matthew Passion and Handel's Messiah and those miniature marvels, the Christmas carols, are among the most rapturous love songs ever composed. Well, here's Dennett, rejecting religious belief, but sharing in the spiritual ecstasy. But Dennett would still press the logical questions. Recognize the beauty of it, recognize the rapture, but still wants to pin people down and say, why do you believe such and such? Say, why? And it's my hope that we can begin asking and answering such questions without tearing each other apart. Now here's E.O. Wilson, biologist and secular humanist, and if you know E.O. Wilson for his sociobiology, well, put that aside. Everybody's allowed one kind of odd thing in this profession, right? Well, put that aside and look at his future life, gorgeous aesthetically and in writing, and his most recent one is entitled The Creation. And I'm going to refer to that several times in the talk, because I think it's a model of communication, one thing which is really important. But for this purpose, here's Wilson. Now, his book is cast as a letter to a Baptist pastor in Alabama. So they have very, very different views, Wilson and the pastor. Wilson says, For you, the glory of an unseen divinity. For me, the glory of the universe revealed at last. For you, belief in God made flesh to save mankind. For me, the belief in Promethean fire seized to set men free. You have found your final truth. I am still searching. Now, I've given, 3 or 4 statements from secular humanists who are atheists to show that there is this much shared. There's more. There's at least this much shared. The appreciation of this deep spiritual feeling. Okay, well, what else would I like to see schools do? I think that we ought to set the historical record straight. This is one of the things that drives me almost to the point of losing it. I'm pretty much a calm woman, but when I hear people insist that the Constitution was based on Christian principles and that the founders of the Republic were Christians, it makes me very tense. Because I don't see where it's necessary. Now, George Washington himself said explicitly the nation was not founded on Christian principles. It doesn't mean it was founded on anti-Christian principles or that it was rejecting Christianity, but simply that this was not the foundation of the nation. Do we teach this in our American history courses? I don't mean harp on it. I don't harp on anything, but I would just gently point this out so that you know this. Do we mention the fact that many of the founders who are so worshipped by many people in this country were not Christians, at least not in belief. Some of them continued to go to church because, you have to keep up appearances. But if you look at their private papers and letters, and in some cases even public statements, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Paine, and probably Adams, I would include Adams in this bunch, were deists, not Christians. Deists. They believed in the God of Spinoza and Einstein. And is that so terrible? Now, should kids hear this in school? Yeah, I mean, it's a historical fact, so they will hear. They should hear more about Thomas Paine. Now, they do hear about Thomas Paine and common sense. And he's a hero of the revolution. Good. They should hear about that. But do they hear about what happened to him after he wrote The Age of Reason? When he was condemned, called every name, the horrible name that you could think of. And what was his motto? What did he say? He said, my country is the world. My religion is to do good. Again, a horrible thing to say. Condemned for this. Many years later, President Theodore Roosevelt referred to him as that filthy little atheist. Right? So on the one hand, here he is a hero of the revolution. On the other hand, he's that filthy little atheist. And our school kids get through high school, through American history courses, without hearing both sides of this. Similarly, we hear about Elizabeth Cady Stanton as the champion of suffrage. She and Susan B. Anthony were, and it still grieves me. There are still times reading the story when I'm almost ready to break into tears. All the years they worked on that, all the people who double crossed them, and neither of them lived to see the day. And they both lived long lives. But kids know that Elizabeth Cady Stanton was out there for women's suffrage. Do they know that she wrote something called the Woman's Bible? That she was just as angry about the way religion treats women as the way politics treated them. And they're not, of course, unrelated. That we should hear about, too. If there's time, I'll go back to say what one of the important things she accomplished there was. Now, yesterday, Jeremy Gunn spoke about the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't think he mentioned coins, but too often again, the school kids think that the motto, in God we trust, was always in our coins, always. 1864, the Secretary of the Treasury suggested to Abraham Lincoln that the new two-penny piece, you can't even imagine the two-penny piece, but there it was, two-penny piece should carry that motto, "In God we trust." And there was some worry about it, you know. But they said, well, let's give it a try. And since there wasn't a furor over it, the following year, all of the coins were printed with that motto. Now, why is that important? It's important only to correct the record so the kids know that it wasn't always there, that it was put on at a time of enormous trial and tribulation, 1864, in the middle of a horrible war. And it was put on, and it hasn't been taken off. Now, the pledge was mentioned that the under God phrase was put in 1954. With another time of tribulation, Cold War, McCarthyism, all this horrible stuff, and it was a way of distinguishing us, a God-fearing nation, from the godless hordes, right? So it was stuck in there. But you can go back even a little farther. Was the pledge itself always there? No, it was in the 1890s, it was 1892. The writer of the pledge was Francis Bellamy, who was a Christian socialist. Christian socialist. Believed strongly in the separation of the church and state, and he wrote it at the invitation of the National Education Association. They asked him for it, and in part to celebrate the opening of the Chicago World's Fair. So all the kids, it was going to be an expression of solidarity for this wonderful opening of the Chicago World's Fair. And now it's become, you think it was something sacred that was written into the Constitution. It was always been there. Okay, so to correct the historical record, I think is a reasonable request. Now that next thing, of course, is the biggie, really biggie, and that's the evolution debate. I think it's pretty well settled, even in Kansas and Pennsylvania now, that evolution will be taught in schools, and that creationism and intelligent design are not generally accepted as science, and so they will not be taught. But these decisions are made by school boards and judges, increasingly by judges, by the so-called public at large. Too seldom are they shared with the kids. The kids will hear about this. Why is this an important question? What's the debate all about? What's the history of it? This is exciting. And kids who are asleep at their desks while you're trying to explain the technicalities of it perk up right away. Oh, and this, by the way, is something I mentioned yesterday. But have you ever noticed this phenomenon? That the whole class perks up when you get off the subject? Now, is that because the little devils just want to get you off the subject? Or is it because when you get off the subject, there's likely to be something really important in real life, and the kids recognize that, they wake up. Maybe something actually important is going to be said here. So of course it should be discussed. And I would say it should be discussed in science class. Other people say, oh, I don't discuss in science class. That should be, that's a social issue. It should be discussed, and I've actually heard people say this, in a history of science class. Well, thanks a lot. There are no history of science classes in our high school, so it's in effect saying that we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it at all. Now, I think two things I want to draw your attention to here. And one of them is of great general importance, and that is we should be rethinking the way our curriculum is organized. The organization around discrete disciplines is really badly out of date. It's time for that to change. But it is one of the most entrenched things in not only in our schools, but in our entire society. You just can't touch the darn thing. Discrete disciplines. And teachers will fight over whose territory this is. Well, for that matter, I've heard English teachers fight over who should be allowed to teach which novel in 10th grade, and they better not teach that one because that's mine in 11th grade, right? I mean, that strict division between disciplines is working against us as we try to educate. And there are quite a few people, and this is happening worldwide, but it's only a few people here. I'm corresponding with some people in China and Japan who are working on it as well. We're recommending that we have to push back the boundaries of the disciplines so that we can talk about things that really matter. I've been urging math teachers to talk about things other than math, but things that are related to math. For example, you could tackle Descartes' proof of the existence of God. The proof does not work, but here we have a famous mathematician who gave it a try, right? Does that belong in a math class? Why not? You're teaching logic. You're certainly teaching algebraic geometry, so why not? Why shouldn't that be in a math class? Now, here's the fear that accompanies evolution itself. Even a couple times on my visit here, I've heard reflections of that fear. It is often not appreciated. Certainly, when we're looking at Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris, and all the books are fun to read, by the way. They really are. I mean, they keep you awake. Reading. There isn't that deep appreciation for the fear that accompanies evolution. However, in a new book by Philip Kitcher, a prominent philosopher, that fear is recognized and appreciated and treated with great sensitivity. He points out that for some people in this country, usually not people academic world where we reside, for some people this is the foundation. Christian fundamentalist beliefs are the foundation of their lives. And when Genesis goes, the fear is that a lot of other stuff is going to go as well. And then what have you got left? Now, Kitcher is eloquent on this. He treats it very beautifully. He wants us to understand that while he doesn't accept any of this stuff that Christian fundamentalists accept, he understands what the fear is. Somehow or other, we have to help people to understand that an acceptance of evolution does not necessarily mean a rejection of God. Lots of evolutionists do reject the notion of God, but there are others who do not. And one I would refer you to is Simon Conway Morris, a paleobiologist, English, whose book, Life's Solution, helps people to understand that you don't necessarily have this dichotomy, all this or all of that. In Life's Solution, which has a subtitle, Inevitable Humans in a Lonely Universe. That's the subtitle. And it's very technical. I mean, I had great difficulty with parts of it because I don't have enough biological training to handle it. But he begins the book by saying, if you are a creationist, or someone like that, you might as well put the book on this book back on the shelf because it will do you no good. And he goes on to say, evolution is a fact. Fact. It is true. It happens. And even we humans are products of it. At the end of the book, and after a lot of scientific data and back and forth, he tells us he believes that evolution is God's way of creation. So this is the way it's been done. And at the end, he leaves open the possibility that the notion of the blind watchmaker might be right, Dawkins' idea might be right, or this other idea might be right. And what he does is take you through case after case after case of so-called convergence in which natural selection and descent with modification seem work purposefully, purposefully. He sees purpose, others see purpose. Now, should kids hear that? Maybe not quite the way I just put it, but something like that. That accepting the one doesn't necessarily mean rejecting the other, although it does mean rejecting a lot of the stuff that accompanies the religious view. No question about that. Okay, so here I'm actually making a recommendation that that debate on evolution be included in science classes. That you don't say, this is science, this is social studies, this is literature. This is life, right? And early in the 20th century, Alfred North Whitehead made that very important point. Is that the school curriculum should be life itself in all its manifestations. Sounds reasonable to me. Okay. Now, the next topic here is the following up on what we should do and what we could do. I've heard several times at this conference that maybe it would be safer just not to talk about religion in schools at all. Leave it out. Leave it for another domain. And I don't brush that aside easily because I understand what people are saying about that. I had a very brief chat with Barry Lynn a few years ago, and he was dashing off somewhere. Doesn't even remember, but he was disagreeing with what I had written in Educating for Intelligent Belief or Unbelief because he said it would just screw everything up, really. They just leave it out. It doesn't belong in the school at all. Now, the separation of church and state seems to be right. No question about that. That doctrine protects religious institutions. Protects individuals so that they can make their own choices, and protects the government from the intrusion of religion, which is something we have to worry about right now. But it also does something else if we take it too far, and that is that it protects ignorance. It protects ignorance. I mean, it's easy to say, well, don't talk about these things, they should be talked about somewhere else. But here we go again, if we don't talk about the evolution debate in science classes. That should be in history of science, but of course we don't teach history of science. And now if we don't talk about religion in the schools, it should be talked about somewhere else. Where? Where? So it protects ignorance. So we have to find a way to talk about religion in schools, but in as fair and logical and respectful as we can. I've already made a couple suggestions on that. So warily, although I recognize the fear that people have on that, warily, I still think we should do it. And we should do it not only to try to intervene in this massive ignorance, and by the way, Americans are massively, appallingly ignorant about religion. In a book that came out just a couple of years ago, Christian Smith, the book is entitled Soul Searching, and what he did, it's a sociological track, what he and his assistants did was to interview teenagers all over the country about their religious beliefs and practices. And if you didn't realize it already, if you read that book, you see that kids are appallingly ignorant about religion, even their own religion, even their own. They don't really know the depths of what's going on there, and they make all kinds of statements that are highly questionable. So if there's a way to talk about these things in school so the kids can begin to ask good questions, questions they should be asking, respectful questions, I think we need to do it. One example that came out was that you ask kids to identify their religious beliefs, and a few, not very many, but a few declared themselves to be deists. And then the very next set of questions, they declared that they felt very close to God. The God that they have already said has nothing to do with everyday life. So they clearly didn't know what a deist was, but it sounded like kind of a something needs to change there. So finally, what we need to do, this is what I started out with. I want to go back to now, briefly. We should be searching for a constructive mode of communication. How can we talk to each other about that? Now, I confess that I agree with most of what Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens and Dennett have said. Long struggle, many years of teaching and thinking. I agree with most of what they've said, but I disagree strongly in the way they have said it. They seem to have forgotten that it's real, live human beings who are on the other end of what they're saying. And we don't open a conversation by mocking and scorning and more or less saying how stupid people are who hold these beliefs. This is where E.O. Wilson, I think, is a model. If you read The Creation, I read that one little part to you in his letter to the Baptist pastor, you will see that he's respectful from beginning to end. But he tries this. He said, look, we can put our differences on this aside and join in a common project. And that common project for him is saving the creation, saving the world. He's a prominent biologist. He shows you with figures what's happening to our world. The extinction of species, the enormous losses, environmental losses. And here he's saying to the pastor, you and I can work together on this. And, by the way, that is one very encouraging sign in this whole tension between religion, between belief and unbelief. And that is that many evangelical Christians are getting on the environmental bandwagon. They are rolling up their sleeves and joining E.O. Wilson in this fight to save creation. There's another example of it that I ran across some years ago. And this is an example that involves women who, some of whom are pro-choice and some pro-life. And an organization started, I think it was called Common Ground, but they don't write that down because that might not be right. Anyway, people were admitted to that group pretty much the way preachers were admitted to the ark, 2 by 2. And so each pro-lifer would be admitted along with a pro-choicer. Now, the organization has been going for quite some time. So far as I know, no one has changed their mind. People who were pro-choice in the beginning are still pro-choice. Those who were pro-life in the beginning are still pro-life. What has changed dramatically is the way they treat women. That has changed dramatically. So no longer will the women, the pro-lifers, in this organization hold up bottled fetuses in front of a woman's face if she's considered an abortion. They just don't. Now you see, it isn't that person with that abominable view. It's Joanne, or Betty, or Mary, and I know her. I don't want her to make tremendous difference. And in so much of what we do all over the world, we want to solve the problem at the heart of things. When we might do better to say, okay, we can't do that, but we can agree not to kill each other, not to tear each other to shreds, and we might even be able to find a common project. And these women have found common projects in working for the children who are already alive and need help. And heaven knows there are plenty of those in the world. Now, Jeremy mentioned yesterday, and I very much liked what he said on this. We are not called upon to respect the other views. There are a lot of other views that I have no respect for at all. In fact, I don't think we're even called upon to respect the person who holds the views. And I know a lot of people I have very little respect for. He suggested that we respect the rights of the other person to hold these views. That's different, and that's important. And from the perspective of the ethic of care, I would say, even if I don't respect the other, I still must care for the other. I don't respect people who have committed horrible crimes and are now on death row. But I do care about the pain and agony they're going to go through. result of our decision to kill them. See, that's different. We can't care. So I could finish up, I suppose, by saying that what's left of my own Christian belief could be narrowed down to the important statement, love one another. It's enough. Don't need all the other stuff that goes with it. And then I would move over and join E.O. Wilson. Because what I want here is to set the historical record straight, be honest, find common projects, study the Bible critically, at least raise a question once in a while. You can read the Abraham story. Mothers hate that story. Admit it, say it out. Look at the record of religion with respect to women. All these things to be done. Then at the very end, probably the most important thing to come out of this is just what E.O. Wilson advises. His advice is this: dare to think for yourself. That's it.